Hi, everyone. Welcome to our final town hall for the spring election. We have the June 23rd primary coming up, so this is our last one that we'll be doing. And I want to thank the entire community for coming tonight, for registering. I know there are a lot of people here, so I'm excited to see you all virtually. And I wanted to welcome Cynthia Nixon so much for being here, an actor, an activist, and a former gubernatorial candidate. Thank you so much for being here.
It's so great to be here in conversation with you.
Thank you. And also thank you and welcome Sochie Nnaemeka, who is the director of the New York State director of the Working Families Party, a powerhouse in this community in an entire state, juggling many balls all the time with incredible grace. Welcome, Sochie.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to tell the community before we get started, we have gotten a suite of questions from the community. Thank you so much for engaging. We have pulled out a few and compiled a few. We had some that were multiple questions that we've tried to streamline so that we could get as many of you heard as possible. So thank you for sharing those. And we will get through some of these and then take more from the panel or more from the people who are registered. So I'll get started so we don't waste any time of our hour together. And I wanted to open it up for the group to Sochie and Cynthia. So my first question to the group is, how do you approach the uphill battle of challenging the system as a woman, as two activists? I want to throw that question out to you first.
Well, you know, certainly when I ran for governor in 2018, it was the first time I had ever run for anything. And I would always think about what Ginger Rogers said when, you know, she said, you know, I danced with Fred Astaire in all those movies and everybody talked about what an amazing dancer he was. But the fact of the matter is every dance step he was doing, I was doing at the same time backwards in heels. But everybody always talked about him. And I think that that is true. Certainly I found that in my campaign, no matter how well I knew my stuff, no matter how progressive and welcome my ideas were for the voters, journalists and pundits, you know, really they would examine everything backwards and forwards and sideways. And my opponent could say a million wrong things in a day and everybody would just, you know, chalk it up. Well, whatever. So I think that that's the thing about running as a woman is you kind of have to be so much better, so many more times better than your male opponent. And I think that though the thing that we should remember that it's surprising maybe is that sometimes the voters that are hardest to get are women, which is so counterintuitive. And I also think that, you know, when you run for office, particularly when you run for office the first time, there's this thing they talk about is like imposter syndrome. And I think we women have such an issue with that in general. And I think it's just men are just, they've been raised or they're hardwired or whatever to just be that much more naturally confident. And I think we have to, you know, work hard to say we actually deserve a place at the table. We deserve a place to be here. So I feel like there are pressures from inside, but there certainly are pressures from outside.
Yeah, that feeling, I you know, where you have to know everything, but not seem like you know everything.
Right.
And fight really hard for something, but be really relaxed about it and be really aggressive to make change, but don't be so aggressive that you seem strident, right? It's that, and it is really that critical eye, particularly of women, for sure. Absolutely. I don't know, Sochie, if you've had a similar experience.
I mean, absolutely. I think, you know, I became an organizer in many ways, but like organizing is about changing the conditions to make it so that people can make bold moves, right? So people who are discounted, whose voices are muffled, who we know are leaders but are not given the platform to take formal leadership. How do we actually create the conditions? How do we provide the opportunities for people to really shine, right? Like Cynthia's saying, how do we get whether it's women or marginalized folks or people who sit, in the back, who are actually the ones with the ideas, but no one is calling on them to do it. How do we figure out the real conditions and opportunities for people to shine? And so for me, I feel like it is one, what are we doing to reshape the system and infuse it with characteristics that we know work better for women and for everyone, right? How do we deal with real issues of care and care gaps? How do we make our spaces more nurturing? Things are considered stereotypically feminine characteristics, but we actually know make it more possible for people to thrive. How do we come into politics not with sharp elbows, but with the all hands on deck approach? How do we think collaboratively rather than competitively? And so for me, I think, how do I make a space in which I feel comfortable and encouraged to be my best and full self? And then how do I infuse that into any space that I have some say over? How do I infuse it into how I hire, how I approach how meetings are run? Because ultimately, I think that our leadership is about shaping the ability for other people to shine also, and to give people the boost to do what they're really meant to do. So many women are matriarchs and leaders in their communities, but are not tapped as official leaders. And so how do we recognize that and allow that to be a platform for people to lead more fully with more support in more formal roles?
Yeah, and I feel that is actually, such a strength of that inherent empathy and the feminine. And I'm specifically not using the word female, right? Like the feminine. We all have feminine. We all have masculine. It's that encouraging the tapping into that feminine nurturing and the inclusiveness and, making space, stepping back, making space, holding space, and evaluating it from that perspective. Is so important. I was looking at, I'm part of Eleanor's legacy. I was endorsed, and it's wonderful. But the thing that's so wonderful about it is that every week they bring us in, they have this cafecito, and it's like this bunch of women and sharing the experiences that we're having and like what's important to us. And what's so beautiful about it is we check in like, hey, how's your mom doing? Like, how's your, right? And that's kind of starts with this emotional space. And one of the things they've communicated is that the legislature is only 30% women. And, that type of nature is still not infused, right? We haven't created that tipping point yet where that focus has shifted to who's not at the table. How do we capture every voice? Is every policy inclusive to all the voices that need to be heard? Who is it disqualifying? Seems sort of an inherent question, but also not needing to, take up all the space and be the center of attention.
Yeah.
And do that, but still win, right? So it's particularly, I think, when you're in a race, it's like if your instinct is, no, I want to hear voices, I want to share voices, oh wait, but I'm the front here running. So I have to put my voice out there. And I think for women, I can say for me, it's been a learning lesson of like, no, actually, it's your voice, it's your name, and it's your responsibility. Hold that. And then when you get there, then create the space that's bigger. So it's definitely that challenge for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think especially seeing you run and the way that you pose questions, right? Which is always hard as a candidate. You want to shine, you want to make sure that you have all focus on you, right? But like the role of the elected is bringing people in as hearing from different perspectives and from, allowing yourself to take a step back and listen and create spaces, I think really makes for excellent leadership, right? And excellent elected leadership. How do you convene the spaces, even if you're not always the center of them?
Right. And I think too, you guys both have probably found this too. I've found a very feminine instinct is to say, oh, like very quickly identify, oh, yeah, I was screwed up on that, or I see my mistake in that. Like always see that, but I see that as a strength. Right? Because then you're like always learning. You say, oh, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. Or I can own that, or I can. And there's that delicate balance too, because that to me is where the juice is of life. Like where the grit is of life, and also where the vulnerability and connections to humanity is. But that's not necessarily an instinct of this system per se. So I don't know if you guys experience that challenge balancing that as well.
Do we want to get to some of these?
Yes,
questions?
absolutely.
Okay, great. Sochie, you want to take this first
Yeah,
one?
sure. No, I mean, obviously there's a lot happening in the world right now, in our state, right? We're at the epicenter of a public health crisis, right? We're seeing tons of unrest and uprisings, in particular in response to a decades-long battle against unaccountable police, right? And police brutality. And it seems like we're kind of at a cusp. There's like an opening to shift something. I'm curious for you, Anna, this call of like defunding the police. Like, how do you engage with that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I first want us to just acknowledge, for me as, a woman, as a white woman, part of my journey has been just always acknowledging that I was born with privileges I didn't earn. Like, just having that go through my system and feel it and recognize, if I didn't have that, what would the world feel like? And come from that place for me. So that has been my first step through this whole process, that like allows me to step back and listen a lot more. And I have, thank God, a lot of, we have a diverse community that is part of this team, and it has been a deep education for me. And this whole, so much emotion with the murder of George Floyd, just pushing things already in a stressful situation, and this just pushing a conversation that has been needed for 450 years to be at this level. And so, I have this feeling like we have to keep it elevated. We've got to keep our energy up, because the changes that I think that so many people have been fighting for so long that have failed, even at the state level, some of the policies that we've been trying to push, like repealing 50A, so that legislation, so that records are not held confidential, or the Stat Act, right? So, that we have to take demographic information. The police have to keep demographic information so we can see any racial discrimination in the police practices. I think those are huge, really important moves forward, but they're just the beginning. And to me, what I have learned in the last, in my work in the last 5 years, is this concept of defund the police at its core. And when I've talked to members of the Black Lives Matter here in the community, is at its core, it is absolutely about shifting our priorities. That we understand what is at the root of crime. We understand that it is homelessness. We understand that it's lack of, access to food. We understand that it's inequity in education. We understand that it is the school to prison pipeline. And if we do not invest in those things, and we're only investing in this Band-Aid end of the line funding of police to sort of squash people who have been part of this process of profound inequity, then we're never going to solve the actual issue, which is criminality. And I think that what the defund the police is saying is, we have a budget in the city that's 55% police, right? And that funding could be in case management, could be in schools, could be in after school programs, could be in, right? We have a community outreach worker at the county, mental health, case management, a treatment facility, drug treatment facility, community drug related programs, supportive housing, right? Those things will get at the core. So to me, that's what it means to defund the police.
Yeah, I think there's a, famous saying, you show me your budget and I'll show you what your values are. And I think for far too long on the city level, on the state level, on the national level, we've just seen police budgets just ballooning, and all of the things that we all need to make our lives better, whether it's education or housing or healthcare, They, of course, always have to shrink when there is a budget gap, which of course there is a great one this year. But why is the police budget, sacred and untouchable? And do we really need our police forces to have tanks? Obviously, something has gone tremendously, tremendously wrong here.
I don't know, Sochie, and there's a lot of state action happening on this that I've been watching, and some of it that I've been a part of. I don't know what work you've been doing, engaging with that, but there's so many aspects of it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think there are two big fights ahead of us, right? So the New York City level, where at the city level where budgets are actually created, right? As Cynthia says, budgets are moral documents. They reflect what your values are. And so at the city level, we're putting a lot of pressure to have city council members and the mayor rethink the police budget, right? That has grown by $1 billion just in the de Blasio years. And with crime down in New York, it is very unclear what the rationale is for that, except for surveillance and disciplining of Black and brown bodies across the city, right? And we've seen MTA police budgets grow, right, to tackle fare evasion, right? Fare evasion, the root cause of fare evasion is poverty, right? Not criminality. We have police in schools. Rochester had a great victory just this week to get police out of schools. That was a result of many of decades of organizing, right? Of how can our kids actually thrive in spaces where they feel surveilled, sanctions, and possibly always at risk of detention, formal, right, carceral detention. And so it's really about, does policing cause people to feel safer? I think the answer has been no. Does it, actually prevent many communities from thriving? I think we have definitely seen that. And does expanding the police directly come at the expense of schools, healthcare, housing, all the things that we actually know make communities safe? It does. And so, as Cynthia says, like during this crisis, when people have been very comfortable telling hospitals that they're going to get cut and schools that they're going to lose nurses and social workers, but not police officers, we really have to rethink what our moral grounding is in this moment, and really imagine and see what does it look like to have less policing? What does it actually look like for our communities to feel free to thrive and not fearful? And this, I think the question is really coming down in this moment. At the state level, there's a lot of opportunity to think about the reducing the scope and the power of the police. At the city level, how do we shrink the budgets? How do we redirect it into more essential services? And so because the tentacles of the police reach so far, there are many different levers to really shrink the scope and the reach and the power of police forces. And so we're looking at all of those potential sites to tackle this quite, it's become quite a beast.
Right. Well, and I think it's important too to recognize it's defund the police, but then where would we focus, and what do in particular, for white people who have the privilege, what does it mean to be anti-racist, not just not racist? And what things, what policies, some people are concerned. I've heard in my district of people saying, yeah, marijuana or cannabis is a gateway, and it's okay, yeah, and or no, yeah, here's the research, and no, it isn't, first of all. But second of all, it is a mechanism to keep Black and brown Americans here in the state oppressed. Because if you look at the actual data, they are many more times likely to be arrested for cannabis-related issues than white people. We know these statistics. So we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what is the policy actually doing? And legalizing marijuana is actually an equity issue, deeply an equity issue. And the other thing that I talk about with people too is our curriculum, education curriculum. One, yes, making sure it's sufficiently funded, but secondly, that the curriculum itself needs to be completely evaluated, that it is an anti-racist, that it I was never taught about Juneteenth. that's appalling. I didn't know about it when I was in high school, and that should never have been, right? Those messages weren't there. So I think that that's, taking it one step even beyond the police. Where would the money go? And I think that people in the community need to ask for that. They need to demand that. And so for anybody listening, especially the white community, like, get really uncomfortable. You always hear a lot like, what of our own privilege do we have, and what can we give up? Like, really question, really look in the mirror. What does it mean to have places or spaces that actually don't feel always so white and exclusionary? And I don't think that we do that on a daily basis.
I think I'm gonna leap ahead to some more of these questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so we had a question come in that says, we would like to know why you failed to hold the IDA accountable and your stance on the IDA. Also, you fought to get a $14 million airport renovation passed. Why did you prioritize money for that over money for our community?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's been a big discussion lately here. The first is with the IDA, and I think that there's a lot of confusion with the structure of government. And as a teacher, I push really hard to get the information out, because that, of course, is really empowering. So the IDA, by state law, is designed as an autonomous entity. So the legislature actually has no oversight over the IDA. And it's very important that if people understand that, then they can go directly to the IDA and speak to that board if there are issues, because there is, by necessity, there is that division. The $14 million for the airport, that I think it's also really important. So a couple of years ago, the state put funding into upstate airports. So it was a grant specifically for airports. And that 14 million was directly from a state grant that had been earmarked specifically for airports. So had we not applied for it, we wouldn't have gotten that money, nor could we distribute it to anything else. But we did have an airport that was very isolated. And one of the things in Tompkins County is we don't have highways. It's very difficult for small businesses to build here, which is something that we are really trying to promote, is the growth of small businesses and startups. And what we've seen is the statistics is that they'll start, but then it's so difficult to have meetings, to get to larger cities, to get raw materials, to distribute out their product, because we don't have highways, that a lot of that initiative, especially for these small startups, was hindered, and they would leave. And the push was that if we could get this state funding, we could actually expand enough that we would attract enough of the larger planes, which I'm not in favor of a significant increased number of planes for environmental reasons, but we would have a larger capacity. And so that 14 million from the state, and then there was 10 million from the federal. And then there was an actual additional 10 million bond, which is a local bond, but that's paid for by airport fees. They're called passenger fees. So there's no local taxes, but we were able to get competitive. There was a lot of push for that to get the state and federal funding so that we wouldn't be so isolated as a community. So for me, I'm very hopeful that we can start to slow down the loss of these small businesses. So we'll see, but that's the goal. And I know, Sochie, I actually had a question for you specifically. In particular, I'm curious what challenges you faced or do you foresee facing as the leader of a statewide political party at the forefront of so much progressive change?
That's a big question, Anna.
Not put you on the spot or anything, but I think your message is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think fundamentally, so I'm new to the party. I've been in my role since January. And so I do appreciate you inviting me into the space to, to meet your folks, even virtually. And it's been really exciting to jump in and endorse in races like yours, where they're real progressive champions to put forward. I got into organizing and in politics because I'm the child of West African immigrants for whom this country was never really clearly their own, despite how many years they've been here. And for me, I had a real search for belonging in this country that really was answered in many ways with organizing, right? Finding people and meeting people across difference and working together towards a shared future. And I think the party fundamentally is a place for people who are looking for a political home. And we are in a moment, I think, in American politics and in New York State politics where people do not feel at home in either of the major parties or at home in the Democratic Party. Either, voters are taken for granted. I think I, as a Black voter, often feel taken for granted by Democratic Party. As a Black woman, assumed that I will always vote a certain way, even if no one is talking directly to me or asking for my vote. And I do think that we need spaces and organizations where our politics and our path to win the type of world that we want doesn't feel disconnected from our values and what we talk to our families about and how we want our children to be raised, right? And we need a political party. I felt like I needed a political party. I needed a progressive movement that allowed me to believe that I could win and that I would not feel icky about it the day after, right? And so we need to run winning campaigns. We need to build a really big tent of the people who've been pulled into electoral politics in the past couple of years, right? Who've seen candidates like Cynthia or like AOC and people and said, oh, that person reminds me of myself. That person shares my values and they're running for office. Interesting. Maybe electoral politics is not such a foreign thing, or maybe it's not such an establishment or insidery game. We have to make politics way more accessible, way more attractive, way more possible and visionary for regular people to actually believe it's not all rigged, right? And the system is not all rigged. And so I think that the work that we have is to build the big tent, to pull more people in, to believing that politics can help deliver the world that we want, to recruit and train and run a lot of transformative, exciting, inspiring candidates who are sent forward by their communities and saying, like, this is our leader, take her, like, we want to vote for her. We need to find way more of those people and create the pipelines for that. And we have to make sure that our campaigns are running on the boldest, most transformative platforms. Like, we're in a really exciting moment, as scary as it feels, in American politics, where people are really questioning the status quo, right? Why doesn't my neighbor have healthcare? And the fact that they don't have healthcare affects me. We're in a global pandemic, right? Why should someone have healthcare only if they are a documented citizen or if they're working? Like, that makes no sense. And so people are really asking these questions. And it's our job to stitch it together and to say, only through transformative politics are we all going to get out of this together. We're all going to get out of this ahead. And so that, I feel, is our biggest challenge. How do we make our platform, our values so clearly common sense to people that they start to organize their actions and their politics around that? And how do we keep people feeling engaged and excited and actually like co-creators in their lives, so they don't feel like our party is taking them for granted in the way that maybe establishment politics are?
Yeah, well, Cynthia, you were.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I so agree with everything you just said, Sochie, that it is a very scary moment on so many levels, but it's also such a moment of opportunity. You know, it's such a painful moment economically. It's such a painful moment health-wise. It's such a painful moment when we have all these killings of Black people by the police that are just seem to be, now that people are finally have phones and are able to film them, and that they're now undeniable, and that this somehow the intersection of this moment of everybody being in quarantine and our attention being brought means that because people have been organizing for this moment for decades and longer, and because people are doing such a great job keeping up the pressure in the streets, the revolutions we're seeing in terms of defunding the police and having talks about racism in America and what racism is, that it's not just the Ku Klux Klan, it's all of us.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a tremendous moment it's a scary moment, but it is a moment for people to believe and to rush toward electoral politics again. And so I know for me in my run, one of the most exciting endorsements and one of the kind of the greatest armies that I had working for me were the young people from the Sunrise Movement. And I know that they have endorsed you, Sunrise Movement Ithaca and the Cornell Progressives. And I just wonder, I mean, I believe in them more than anybody. And they are our future, and they are leading, and we are joining them. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about those endorsements and what it means to you to have such visionary and committed young people as part of your campaign.
Yeah, and it's hard to even communicate like the extent of just the pride and honor that it has been, because it's such an overwhelming feeling. I've been a teacher for 15, 20 years of my life, from high school to college to grad school. Like, so for me, I've been immersed in the experience of engaged learning, of experiencing the creativity of students and seeing it blossom, and just see the outside the box thinking, how like visionary, just visionary. So many of the youth are on my team. That is so inspiring. One of the most frustrating things that I hear, and I hear it all too often, is young people don't vote. And I've had so many conversations with youth, and it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, they say, because it's so demoralizing. And two, part of what they say to me is, and I love it, is give us something to vote for. We want sincerity. We want honesty. We want to break out of like the established way of thinking. You have problems, address the problems. Like, I want to hear that. I don't want to hear lip service. And so in my experience, they challenge me, and we have these incredible dynamic conversations. I had an hour-long conversation with Daphne Frias, who's this amazing activist, youth activist in the environmental movement. And it was one of the more inspiring interviews that I've had during this entire time. So for me, I feel like they're everything, and they'll say to me, this is my world. And you are in a position to make a change in this world that will affect my entire life and the quality of my life. Please, imploring, please stand up. Please use this voice, so for me, that there's so much heart in it. There's so much soul in that conversation to me. And for me, to honor them, I have to have the courage to step up and meet them at the same place, stand up and meet them in that creative space. And I feel like we're well met. It's sort of like, kind of that soul meeting, and there's a huge group of youth that have joined this team, and they keep it alive. They keep the energy alive. Our team calls on Sunday nights are just full of energy. And so for all of them watching, by the way, you are my heroes. Thank you. And thank you for asking that question.
Sochie, I see we have another question in the link. Do you want to ask?
Yeah, I actually want to ask this question. We're talking about young people, but thinking about the other spectrum of our elderly residents. During COVID, we've seen a real crisis and attack on our nursing homes. It has been really devastating to so many of our families, and that's shown that it's not a safe place for the elderly. So I'm just reading this question that we got here. It says, from underpaid and underprotected staff to Medicare and Medicaid rules that are bankrupting elders and government, where can we begin to address this crisis?
Yeah, I will take that one. Absolutely. I think that, what COVID has brought a lot to the fore. And I think one of the sort of recognized missteps that has happened over the last 6 months was sending, COVID positive patients back to nursing homes, that has created tremendous issues in the nursing homes, and significant amount of deaths in the nursing homes. And I think first, owning that, recognizing it, and in my experience over the last 5 months of reaching out to people and talking to people, what I hear from a lot of the elderly community in our district is no one's calling them, no one's reaching out, no one's using media that they use, right? Like they'll say to me, I have a landline, I have my hours, I have, I look at the news, I get the physical newspaper, but there's this feeling of being totally discounted, their opinions being discounted, and the problems that they're facing not being counted, and therefore they're not being prioritized in budgeting. They're not being prioritized for programs. Long-term care, for example, I'll hear that a lot, and that there's not sufficient funding in it. And the services that they need, for example, home care. So a lot of the people, the elder population, they don't want to move into a nursing home, they want to age in place. And we know in the research that that actually is a significant higher quality of life. And overall, the cost to the community is less. And yet we're not focusing on it. We're not investing in those programs that will allow people to age in place. So I would say in my experience, it's one, reaching out in the medium in which they are communicating, and then two, making sure that we prioritize the quality of life, in particular in the stay-at-home environment. So that's been my experience. I know, and there's a related question that actually someone brought up that I'm seeing. Someone said only 11 states define EMS as essential. New York does not. Would you support defining the EMS as essential as a way to increase alternatives to policing? Oh, well, this is specifically related to policing. I'll just say yes, hands down. We need diversity right now. And I would say even more than EMS, case management, mental health, that we are prioritizing mental health. We have a mobile crisis unit that we send now sometimes with the police to prioritize identifying when there's a mental health issue, in a particular case. That should be standard practice. So absolutely diversifying the care managers that are responding to calls, 911 calls, is absolutely critical. We have put so much just on the police. They don't have the training. And also talking to police, it puts them in harm's way because they don't have the training. So they are going to use the same hammer for every single situation because that's the training that they have. The system itself is not working in that way. As someone said to me, the system is not broken. It is actually working exactly as it was designed. That is intentional, including the structural racism and the racial profiling in those systems. So if we want to address this system and create equity, then absolutely EMS is essential. EMS should be one of the core responders to 911 in these cases, but diversify even more.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the things that really struck me every time I came to Ithaca during the campaign was how outside the box the thinking was for ways in dealing with addiction, and completely, the push to decriminalize it and have safe use sites and offer people counseling, but not push it on them. And just, it does seem certainly an area that the police are in charge of. They're not very good at it. There tends to be so much escalation. And if we want to deal with addiction, to deal with it as a healthcare issue, not as a criminal issue, is really important.
It is a public health issue.
Oh, now I see we have another question here. Let's see. It says, the economic effects of COVID are going to be tremendous. Recently, the news reported that of all the world economies have lost 5% of their GDP. Great amounts of wealth have been lost, but what do we do? Is it time for austerity or time to eat the rich, metaphorically speaking? Do we nationalize pharmaceutical industries? Do we create a one-time wealth tax of XX billion dollars for Bezos and his friends? What can we do in New York, which is conveniently the home of Wall Street and quite a few billionaires?
I think we all have an opinion of this one. That is a very long, large question that touches on probably 5 different policies we would all like to see happen. I'm going to throw one out and bounce it off of both of you. But one of the things that I think is so critical and why I've been fighting for the New York Health Act for universal health care, we came into this pandemic with a $6 billion deficit. And we already know that $4 billion of it was due to Medicaid. So we already know that the system isn't working, and 1/3 of the state is on Medicaid. So when the analysis that has been done, there is an amazing study that came out. I don't know if you guys saw it. It came out in February, Yale's study. It was a national study. It was a conservative analysis that showed that at the national level, universal healthcare, a single payer system, would create a significant savings over our existing system. There's another amazing study that came out by Friedman in New York State. It was an evaluation of New York State exclusively, right? That's one of the big arguments, is that no, the economy isn't big enough and it couldn't handle it. But the analysis consistently show, the most conservative to the most progressive consistently all show that it would be a savings in New York State. It would eliminate many of the administrative overhead costs, the premiums, streamlining processes, but it would also create a progressive tax rather than the current regressive tax. Tompkins County, 25% of our budget is an unfunded mandate for Medicaid. So it would be an immediate savings in property tax, which is a regressive tax, harder on lower income families, where the single payer system or New York Health Act would be progressive, increasing as someone's ability to pay, which in a way is, one of the taxes on the rich, that would increase. So that's one. I mean, I think that, we all have also opinions about taxing the rich. I would say focusing on Wall Street, right? There's so many loopholes, specifically the trades, and not taxing the stock trades. So there's several of them that have been identified, that have evaluated that it would be billions of dollars worth of savings just closing those Wall Street loopholes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Sochie.
No, I want to agree. I mean, we're seeing now during this crisis that, we have 118 billionaires in New York State alone, and whose wealth has surged in the crisis, right? So in this idea that we're all going through this crisis together in the same way, we know that that's not true. We know that many industries are actually profiting and growing right now at the expense of working class families, immigrant communities, children, et cetera. And so I think one of the biggest mandates, right, going into Albany, Anna, would be to really lead on the most direct and effective revenue proposals, right? So from the ultra billionaires tax to the pied-à-terre tax, right? There are all of these ways in which we can really gather resources that we know are desperately needed when we're cutting from schools and from hospitals. And so the a progressive revenue table across the state has put out about 12 or so different ways to dramatically increase revenue from the very, very wealthiest New Yorkers who have not been paying their fair share and actually have been coming out very much ahead in this crisis. And so it's really about political will. It is about whose lives people value. It is about who people think should absorb the most risk in a crisis, and who should get to come out of something ahead. And so there are very, very smart ways to shift revenue towards the many who are really suffering in this moment, and who are facing their own cuts while others are being protected in this moment.
Yes, I so agree. The stock transfer tax, there are, as you say,
much,
Sochie,
yeah.
there are just a list of really practical taxes for getting people to pay their fair share in ways that these people would not honestly even feel.
Right.
And that not only are we looking at terrifying cuts on the state level in education and in healthcare and in so many areas that are really directly support our most vulnerable people. But what we're looking is not only these cuts where we can't afford to have them, but then an enormous amount of borrowing to fill the budget gaps, which surely nobody thinks is a good idea, and that we finally, as a state, have to grapple with the incredible amount of wealth here and say we are needing money, but we actually have the wealth that we need, and we just need to tap it. We have about 10 minutes left. And so Anna, I just want to, take this moment to like turn over to you, and just ask you to tell us, in the next week, why are we going to be voting for you? Why do we want to send you to Albany? And also I would say, I think a lot of people on this call already know a lot about you and who you are and what you stand for and where you come from. But maybe if you could put a little of that in too for people who are maybe tuning into you for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cynthia, for asking that. I would say what I feel in my heart, I think that I am the candidate with the greatest breadth of experience. I have had, decades of being an activist, an environmental activist. I came from an environmental background, but also have training in public health. One of the things that I think is very unique about what I'm bringing is that there, right now in the state legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly, there is not a single public health scientist. And we are in the middle of a pandemic. Not only a public health scientist, but my training is in nutritional epidemiology. And the training of epidemiology, we're trained to think as systems thinkers, evaluating causality, looking at entire systems and figuring out with all of these messy pieces, what is the path forward collectively with all of these pieces to a solution. And that's my training by nature, to not let the emotions of the moment sort of carry me away, but what's the science, what's the evidence, what's the research, bring that all in and then understand the political environment. And I think that that's really important. I have been a county legislator for 5 years. I was a professor at Cornell in public health. I was in academia for a very long time, transitioned, and in my work on the county legislature, it is a bipartisan legislature. And I think there's a unique experience about working in a bipartisan legislature and coalition building specifically in a bipartisan body, because it challenges you to really listen and to be conscientious of, what you're pushing, what are your arguments, and what can you really be effective with? What policies could really be effective? Because in a democracy, you need a majority vote always, right? So it's sort of the hard knocks, I think, of an experience. And in that environment, I've still passed every single piece of legislation I've ever brought forward. So I have a track record of being very effective, both representing an urban environment and a rural environment. So spreading my qualifications and my focus, I have chaired Health and Human Services, which is in my wheelhouse. But my nature is to challenge myself to always go into areas where I might be uncomfortable, where I might not know as much. So I shifted into planning, development, and environmental quality. And it was the development piece that I really wanted to understand more, because that's not my background. And now I chair the Housing and Economic Development Committee. So just continuously challenging myself and putting 150% of my energy and time into, understanding, learning, and then communicating. So I'm a teacher. You can't take that out of me. I will always work to both educate the community and create that transparency, and then listen and bring back what I'm hearing and pivot if I need to. So I think that that ability is also really important, to put my personal interests in the back burner if it is not what I'm hearing from the community that the problems are. There's some, the fundamental way to get buy-in is not pushing always your own agenda, but allowing the community to communicate and share what the greatest needs are, and and find a way to represent that. So those are some of the things that I think that I would be really bringing to this table. Also, I just realized the state experience too is very helpful. And Cynthia, your endorsement and support, and Jumani's and Sochie and the Working Families Party, working with Local Progress, and I know both of you know Local Progress, has been one of the greatest gifts that I've had. Local Progress is a national organization, a network of progressive elected officials. We started a state chapter 2 years ago, and I co-chair that state chapter. So we have been working on political agendas at the state level for years. So I have, also years of state experience writing, resolutions, lobbying for those resolutions, connecting with state legislators, connecting with the second floor, Cuomo's office, and trying to push those agendas successfully. We've worked on housing, human rights issues, voter reforms, water and sewer funding, infrastructure funding. So it's been an exciting 5 years, but I'm at that point where I can't continue to fight for what I want, because a lot of the things that I see are affecting the community need to be fought for at the state level. So to be really effective and to use all my skills, I need to take it there to the state. So that's my hope.
Great.
We're so happy that you're running. We really, really, really are.
Thank you for your support. It is tremendously meaningful. You both are wonderful mentors. Wonderful mentors.
And I'm so glad Jumani endorsed that. I just saw that for the first time just before we got on the call. That's great.
Yeah, he has come to Ithaca, as you have, several times, and that has been very meaningful. I really wanted to thank you for taking the time to connect with us here in Tompkins County, in the Cortland County area. Your presence was deeply meaningful for many, many people in this community, and to hear your heart.
Sochie, any thoughts? Anything you want to say?
I mean, this is great. I say we're running out of time shortly, but this is a really exciting race, and I think a really important moment. I know that we say that every election is the most important election of our lifetimes, but this one feels really important. This feels like there's a lot on the table. There's a lot of big questions and challenges that we're careening towards as a state, and we need steady, clear, visionary, and creative leadership, right? Working in teams with strong policy knowledge and with grounded community support. Right now is not the time for narrow thinking. Now is not the time for a million work groups. Like, we just need to get to work. We need to lead with everything that we have, because we are in multiple moments of crises, of intersecting crises. And as Cynthia says, they are opportunity. There are opportunities to really radically shift the direction that we're going into. And so the Working Families Party is incredibly excited to support you, to continue to support you and govern and lead and work alongside you. I encourage folks to check out the Working Families Party website and to learn more about the work that we do, and also to continue to help us support brilliant and necessary candidates like Anna and like Cynthia, right? So we can shift the direction of the state in a real way. But I'm really excited about your candidacy and your very soon to be leadership at the state level representing Ithaca.
We have a lot of work to do. I like to acknowledge that, the whole world has sort of been brought down to its knees through this pandemic, but it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity that maybe we won't ever see again. So building it back up, different than previous deep recessions where all the money is shifted, to the top, and having this one be a deep push for equity in housing, equity in, environmental justice, equity in healthcare, equity in childcare. Like, we have an opportunity that won't ever come again, and it has to happen right now. So I love the message and the agenda and the vision of Working Families Party. It is a deep honor to be a candidate that has been endorsed, and I will absolutely continue to work on these issues with you. I wanted to, I'm glad we got through all of the questions, but more than anything, Sochie and Cynthia, thank you so much for taking an hour of your time with me. I know both of you have crazy schedules. Cynthia, the work that you're doing, and then simultaneously your family and your activism that you never stop doing. You're such an incredible figure and hero for so many people. Thank you. And Sochie, just thank you for your power and your articulation of these issues. So incredible and powerful. I think that you stand for a tremendous amount of women and the community, young community here. I know they speak so highly. They were very, very excited. My team was so excited to hear you speak. So I wanted to honor you as well for all of your work.
Thanks to both of you. This is a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you for the community for watching. It's been a wonderful hour. I hope you all go out and enjoy this incredible evening and take a break. And thank you for being here, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night. Don't forget to
night.
vote.
Don't forget to vote.